What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? My coworker likes to initiate conversations, then does long pauses where you go to say something back, then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in, ends up riddled with spelling mistakes while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately, it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. My boyfriend does that weird conversation thing. Sometimes I just try to talk over him. Sometimes I leave the room. He still doesn't know what I'm talking about when I bring it up. My current suspicion is he's formulating the next sentence during that pause. Either way, it drives his mum and I insane. My least favorite coworker would also cut people off to say and keep you from speaking. Then he'd try to flex by turning questions around on you, except they'd either be irrelevant or already answered while he was dicking around on his phone. I lost productive time just fuming about it. I had a coworker who did this to such a degree that I started hating my job. She was my desk buddy, our desks were side by side in a tiny room. She would spend the entire day talking about her life, then taking weird pauses like she made some hilarious joke that deserved a reply. I'd begin to talk or ask a question, but without fail 5 to 10 words in she'd start talking over me about a totally irrelevant or new topic as if I wasn't even there. Then she would end her rambling with a joke or quip and stare at me for my knee-slapping response, which was more a polite chuckle and eye roll. Then we would start the whole process again. If I didn't respond, she didn't mind. She could talk for 8 straight hours right at me with zero feedback. Blair worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay in the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words, sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. Every time I think I'm a fuck-up, I read stories like this and I feel better about myself instantly. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my 3rd day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. I was a research assistant at a mortgage firm. Whoa. Had this same situation. We had a full maintenance crew, but my department had previously helped with parking lot trash until our hours were cut, which was discussed and mandated from corporate. The top guy for our location came in extra early, picked up the parking lot trash, and dumped it on my desk. Then he berated all of the managers in front of everyone for my department. Just the tip of the iceberg when it came that asshole, though. They always put that bullshit and all other duties as assigned line in there. Fast food. 3rd shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. How TF do you afford Coke on a fast food paycheck? Context: I work in a hospital as a nurse's aide and my department focuses on transporting patients around the facility for tests and room changes. I work night shift and this person started their shift at 6 a.m. There was this lady I worked with that just had the nastiest attitude. Normally I can get along with most folks, but this person just brought the whole room down with negative vibes. Nothing was ever good and she always had bad shifts. One thing she did that upset a lot of people was take patients down for X-rays and leave them down there to return to our office. The big thing to remember here is that even the lengthiest X-rays take maybe 10 minutes, at the very most 2 to 5 minutes on average for the scans. Every morning we got X-rays to do and I had to send her back down to return patients to their rooms after the X-ray technicians called right as she got back to our office. The instances of leaving patients were common, so I informed my boss several times in person and email. Apparently she had an attitude with every other department we worked with and never informed nurses that we were moving their patients. Big no-no when meds and vital signs need to be done. One day she had abandoned a patient in the waiting room when they were waiting for a ride home and told no one, so security had found a patient just sitting alone for 15 to 30 minutes without supervision. It took this and a year of recorded evidence for this person to finally get fired. When that happened, it's like a dark cloud lifted and a lot of people were relieved. Oh, and she tried to get various employees around the facility to sign a form to argue against her case. One person signed. Lol at the form signing, OMG. My deepest terror is that I am that person at work and that no one would sign that form, but hopefully neither of us are those people less than 3. I was a CNA for 10 years and quit last year to go to school for geology. Sometimes I miss it, then I think about all the bullshit like what you're saying. We had so many fucked up employees both literally and figuratively. I'd noticed one specific aide, and only this aide, was logging out NARCS for a demented resident. Brought it to the attention of the executive director and head nurse with the NARC books. Nothing happened for months until a resident who wasn't medicist was missing hydrocodone from their room after she delivered it when pharmacy came. Luckily, the family had a hidden camera. She was finally fired. One caregiver was caught drinking out of a vodka bottle in the middle of her shift. Not fired. Multiple caregivers frequently calling off, being late, no write-ups. I understand staffing is difficult, but to put residents' patients at risk is 10 times worse and harder for other employees to deal with. The job is stressful enough. I have several bad ones, but the one that drives me the most crazy is a lady who creates problems just so she can solve them. Ugh. She takes a simple job, finds the one tiny issue, blows that up and freaks everyone out and then solves it so she can be the hero. Just take the 1 minute to fix the issue in the first place. It would save the literal hours she spends working everyone up so she can be their savior. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way, and not to ask questions because I should already know what to do. I had just gotten the position. My wife talked about a supervisor her first husband had. When the husband had an idea about improving their methods, the supervisor, who had a really strong Chicago accent, think of Saturday Night Live, Da Bears, would say, "You don't tink. I tink, and you do." When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office, my cube shared a thin wall, gossip, then call those people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for shit she did wrong. She was so arrogant. And she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. I worked somewhere in the last 3 years where they hired a secretary who refused to use a computer. I couldn't fucking believe it, in this day and age. I worked at Starbucks for a year, one of the very worst years of my life, and while I was there had a coworker named Eric. I was at the till the day Eric came in with his resume, and there under his name he had typed "Architect of Imagination." Eric was an aspiring writer, but he had trouble stringing a sentence together. He couldn't be on the machine because he couldn't remember how to use it or how any single drink was made. He couldn't be a support role because he had no way of predicting or understanding what anyone else on the floor needed or even was saying. He couldn't be on register because he couldn't mark a cup, and even our most patient customers would inevitably raise their voices at his incompetence. Reliably, he would genuinely look like he was about to cry. I was so torn between rage and pity. He made a terrible job so much harder, but he was just so breathtakingly, pitifully, shockingly dumb. I have never met anyone like him, before or since. One night I was thinking about something particularly vicious I had said in response to something particularly baffling Eric had done, and found myself wondering about his life outside of our store. Was the world scary and confusing to Eric? Did it seem like life was just happening to him? I imagined him standing in traffic, looking vaguely surprised and confused, forgetting how he had gotten there. I looked him up on Facebook and was pretty disturbed by what I found. Eric didn't look awkward or scared on Facebook. He looked stylish, suave. He had product in his hair. Beautiful women in expensive-looking clothes smiled in his photos. Several posted on his wall, expressing what a good time they'd had with him recently, often citing a writing sesh. It felt like I was on a different plane. It felt like I was having a stroke. So then my question became, who is Eric? And who is scamming whom? The popular theory in the store was that Eric was essentially a method actor, doing research for a book or script. I came close to asking him about it a few times, but I was so afraid that I was wrong. I imagined myself over and over asking, "Are you a method actor, or are you really and truly this stupid?" It just wasn't something I could bring myself to risk. I wonder about him all the time, actually, and who he might be terrorizing today. This is wild. I need answers. My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done, I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. Fuck Walmart, and fuck that bitch for almost getting me arrested. I was a Walmart cashier, and some young adults, I checked them out. They came back, and said I shorted them $20. I said I don't think I did. My drawers were always balanced, to the penny. They insisted I shortchanged them $20. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, because, shit, I've been shortchanged before, and maybe I really did. I'm not impervious to mistakes. So I called my CSM over, described the situation and said I'd like to drop my drawer and have her count it. Now the young adults are all, "It's no big deal, we don't want to be any trouble or waste any time." And of course you know the ending, those two guys were working a con on me, or trying to. CSM counted my drawer, and it balanced, to the penny. The conmen left, and my CSM said I did the right thing. I was right, I didn't shortchange those bastards. Your story about the girl conning you with cashing the check reminded me of those dudes trying to con me. Sorry she got the best of you. I had some WIC checks that I didn't realize had to be filled completely, as in the customer must get each item on the sheet, no less, no more. Walmart was on the hook for probably $50 worth of stuff. Got what felt like an interrogation until they realized I truly had no fucking clue. I left that office, clocked out, and never returned. No contest. It was the literal crackhead I worked with for 4 months that was also secretly living in the office and being completely nonsensical when he was actually working. We found a mattress folded up in the warehouse after he was let go, and an actual, brand new crack pipe with a price tag on it, to boot, squirreled away back there. He and his family, not just him living in the office, left discarded food everywhere, like pizza crusts in the toilet brush holder in the bathroom, and they left hair in the sink in the bathroom, as they were obviously bathing in there, too, as we had no actual bathing facilities in the office. One day during his tenure, he sent an email saying his alarm didn't go off and he'd be in at X time, which kept getting moved back later and later. He eventually showed up at 4:40 p.m. and we closed at 5 p.m. lol. See comment above about secretly living in the office. There's so much more I could go into. It was a wild 4 months, that's for sure. *edit This blew up in a way I did not anticipate, and I've gotten a few responses that I'm making this up, but let me tell you, I really wish that I were. His girlfriend was always around at work and she would move in a way that you would absolutely never see her face. We thought maybe she had a warrant out for her arrest or something. I think only one of us saw her actual face, and she would also sit behind the warehouse bay door in their Nissan Altima, with it running, all day, for the AC when she wasn't back there with him. He wanted us to hire her to help him, which wasn't happening. Our warehouse area was concrete flooring which didn't get cleaned often at all, and she'd walk around back there barefoot. As mentioned before, he was completely nonsensical at work as well. He suggested to my coworker, who scans our old documents to PDF via a feeder on our copier, of course, that she should take a picture of each page with her cell phone and do it that way. I got multiple emails from him that made no sense at all, and I eventually had to just forward some to my boss so he could see what was going on. It was a sad situation, but also a WTF situation for the rest of us. He brought his GF to the interview and asked if she could sit in on it because it was so hot outside. Now, if we didn't have a Walmart and a huge shopping center within spitting distance, that might have made sense, but that was pretty unprofessional and they still hired him. All we did was lose money by employing him. He worked on one pro bono job we did and managed to fuck that up. This was at an engineering firm, by the way. I must be naive, but a crack pipe with the price tag attached. Does it actually say, crack pipe? Made in America with 100% renewable resources. I'm picturing the guy smoking with the price tag hanging off it, like when Chevy Chase points the gun at John Candy in Vacation. OMG, you worked with Creed. We had a second set of offices in a building I worked in that was used for customer companies to set up shop as they helped us fab their products and create an assembly process. They didn't get used very often. But we had a very well-known airline company come in for the above specified reasons, and in one of the back offices they discovered a gross mattress, Hennessy bottles and used condoms on the floor from one of my co-workers who set up his shag shop in there because he still lived with his mom and had no other place bring his women. I have no idea how the conversation went down when the customer discussed what they had discovered with the owner of my company, but I would have loved to be there to hear it. Nobody ever discovered who the fuck factory belonged to outside the people he told, and he was a cool guy, so we weren't going to rat on him. I'm still stuck on pizza crusts on the TP holder, lol. This is just hysterical to read. Please share more crackhead warehouse dweller stories, if you have any. Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips his food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales. And the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized. Said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. Me reading your comment, _ I hired a cook. Oh, this is going to be about drugs. Drugs are a hell of a drug. I worked in childcare, and they had hired a new assistant, trainee teacher for my room. Each room has 2 teachers. She just constantly argued about the dumbest shit, and always tried to argue with me about both company and state childcare policies because that's dumb. Also was late every day her first week there. It all just started adding up until I was changing diapers and she was holding a 2-year-old child on her lap. I see a child biting another child and say, "You need to go help them," as I have a child in the middle of a very explosive poopy diaper change up on the changing table and can't leave him there obviously. She doesn't get up. I repeat it, and she says, "Well, I have this kid on my lap," so I say, "Take him off your lap." She responds, "He's strong," like this grown-ass adult is unable to move a 2-year-old off her lap because of some weird super strength. Then the child bites the other child again, and at that point I'm mad and tell her to get up and help them now. She then proceeds to say, "So what, I have to watch these 4 kids while you just have one up on the table," like I'm somehow supposed to have multiple children on the table at once to make her job of sitting on the floor making sure kids don't get bit twice in a row easier, and our ratios were 4-to-1 anyways. I finished my diaper change, stuck my head out the door to my supervisor and told her, "Get this lady out of my room," and they did after, and wrote her up after reviewing the footage of the incident. She was fired for no call no showing the next week. I've worked with a lot of idiots in childcare, but she was so shitty in such a short amount of time. Oh man, I had a short stint in childcare and had to quit because of the lack of help. I wish I would have had a room of 4 toddlers with another teacher, we would have done so well. Instead I was stuck in a class by myself with 7 toddlers, one of which was a serial biter, and there was nothing I could do come diaper changing time except watch in horror and try to hurry up. I felt like shit having to constantly talk to the victims' parents about each incident, and I begged my director for help, but she wouldn't hire another teacher, who knows why. I just texted her one day after work saying I was done and wouldn't be back. It was terrible. The HR manager at my last job had zero training, education or experience in HR. She was argumentative, passive-aggressive and incompetent. Toward the end she asked me, "Why are you being resistant?" and "You're not being a team player." When I was advocating for client safety. I was the second person in less than a year to leave and hire an attorney. Oh geez. It's the worst when the person we are supposed to turn to for help are not properly trained. At a former job, the general manager was also in charge of HR because it was small office. He was a buddy of the owners and would pit people against each other on a regular basis. There was so much unnecessary drama because of this guy. It's been years, but just the thought of walking into that office and all of its chaos makes me nauseated. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. The pay you complete shit and work you so hard it tears you body and mind up. I just graduated high school and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy the first work with, we nicknamed Big Matt since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked, but this 35-year still lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking in her being raped, and ever since then he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse, he just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a fucking idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 coworkers didn't show up, so I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. Next day one of the coworkers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an O of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. So before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6-foot-some-odd-inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch her life for calling the cops on him. Next day I looked him up, and sure enough he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst coworker out of all the ones I faced. What was the other Matt like? Big Matt just wanted to protect his mama, but he couldn't protect her from himself. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or 2 and we had no idea who was responsible. My coworkers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Chanel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She'd left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the Chanel Bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. I didn't realize a scent-free policy was a thing. Was that due to the type of work you were doing or allergies or something else entirely? Cedar-scented psycho-alliteration with words that start with different letters. I love English. Edit, you don't realize how large Reddit actually is until a comment reached 2K plus upvotes in an hour. I have a coworker who's very old-fashioned and strongly believes that males and females cannot be friends. Well, it just so happens that my manager and I, a male and a female, happen to get along quite well because of our similar ages and interests. She reported me to the other managers for it and accused me of sleeping with him. People like this drive me nuts. The 1950s can keep them, we don't want them here. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5 shits a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back and triumphantly announce, "That's shit number 3. Fucking Daniel. Let a man announce his shits. 5 shits a day keep the doctor away." Edit, thanks for the gold, kind stranger. What do you mean? Daniel sounds like an informative pal, keeping everyone on top of his shit count and how much he loves football. He would walk in every day like it was his first day with no memory of anything we showed him the previous day. He was only focused for the first 30 minutes, then the rest of the time would be on his phone and try to work with one hand, which is bad because I work in a restaurant. Can't cook with one hand, but that didn't stop him from trying. Then one day he just stopped showing up for like a week, then was confused when he came back and was fired. Edit: I'm not sure if he had memory issues or anything like that, at least he didn't tell us or the owner. He did however like to talk about how easy our job was because he'd had 4 other restaurant jobs before this one. He was only 19, but we didn't make him do anything complicated, but he would forget easy things like where we kept burger buns or where buttons were on the register. Also, he always left trash laying around after he was done with a job. It would be me and my other coworkers who cleaned up after him, and his excuse was always that he didn't think it mattered because it was gonna get cleaned up eventually. He still comes in every once in a while to watch our TV, sometimes with friends and sometimes by himself. He never buys anything, but he just does it quietly so no one bothers him. I had a packager operator I worked with on the machine I run. He did okay, but every Monday I would have to basically retrain him on the packager controls. I guess he had an excuse though, because he had a TBI from a motorcycle wreck years before. Once I jogged his memory, he did good for the rest of the week. I worked with a guy like this. In fact, everyone, even the managers, called him first day name. Every single shift he had to be essentially retrained on how to do our relatively easy job. What's nuts is that he was seemingly intelligent. He creeped the fuck out of all the girls at work, and then it came out he had stalking and sexual assault charges pending outside work. Fired that day. I had a guy at work make a bunch of gross comments in a full break room. My husband was sitting in the break room waiting for me. Heard all of it. I walked right into HR and listed the 30-some people in this normally really quiet lunch room. That dude was so gross. Similar story. I was the new person at work and met the creepy guy. He was super friendly to everyone and people reciprocated, but there was something off about him. I avoided him my entire time and eventually moved on to another job. A year or so later, I see his face in the news. Apparently said coworker had loads of child pornography on his computer and somehow got caught. He was fired and went to jail. One of my coworkers creeped on all the women who weren't managers. His employment ended when he texted me a picture of his penis. He then tried to say he had consent because he had first texted, "Let me show my piercing." 2 things wrong with that argument. Firstly, I never responded to any of his texts, and secondly, he never said where the piercing was. Luckily for me, the new store manager had been trying to find a reason to get rid of him. Still, even with the texts and picture, I had to get someone else to file a sexual harassment complaint as well, which wasn't difficult. He's now in jail for raping his then 7-year-old stepdaughter. I hope he stays there forever. Had a coworker at my garbage truck driving job who I had to ride along with as training for 1 full day, only 9 hours, so it was a short one that day, luckily. He made so many inappropriate shitty comments that I told my room I never wanted to work with him one-on-one again because it was awful. He had a reputation with the men, all of my coworkers were men, for being annoying and kinda crazy, but with me he was fucking creepy as shit. Then like 3 months later I got a shoulder injury and couldn't do heavy lifting, and he had a brain injury and couldn't drive, so they put him in my truck despite my very loud, vehement protests. He said some super fucked up shit, like rapey comments about his ex-girlfriend who he was clearly obsessed with, and comments about how one of the guys she dates on a dating site is gonna rape and murder her children and her, but he went into such detail about how these imaginary men could track her down and do this that it almost sounded like a fantasy of his, or a plan. I had to ride with him for 2 10 to 12-hour days in small towns and rural areas with no cell phone service, and a few times I was honestly a little afraid he might possibly rape and murder me and leave my body in a cornfield, or that he might get physically aggressive with me. I could write a fucking novel about all the fucked up shit he said and exactly why he was unstable, but I won't dump it all in this comment. It all eventually ended in a huge HR investigation and my one room getting fired and the other disciplined and sent to sexual harassment training for putting him with me despite knowing he made me uncomfortable and said shit about breast size and women's weight, and mocked my husband's picture and said he looked like my little brother. Fuck that guy. Sorry this turned into a rant about him, but it was an awful time of my life and I dealt with lots of anxiety on the job for a couple months afterwards before I finally quit. He was a disgusting, unstable person and I worry for the safety of his ex-girlfriend and her family. I worked with a guy who couldn't learn new skills. When he started he had to learn new programs and processes, just like anyone would at almost any job. He couldn't pick up on it, whether it was where to click in a software to get a certain result or how to fill out a report. Everyone on my team took turns showing him the ropes and it never sunk in. I remember being so frustrated because he could not figure out how to minimize a window. Top right corner, click on the straight line. It took like 3 to 4 seconds for him to drag the mouse to the corner and then he'd hover around it but never on it. Super nice guy, but impossible to work and collaborate with on projects because so much time was wasted. So did he get fired, or did you just transfer to a different area? I worked with someone in retail. He was my boss, and not a particularly bad guy, but he was a control freak who had to interject his opinion during every conversation anyone was having with a customer. This also went as far as him being in the middle of helping someone himself, stopping helping that customer to lean over to my till to help me with my transaction even though there was no indication I needed help and had worked there for over 5 years. This help would be in the form of him telling me what button to hit next on the till, to telling a customer they were wrong to have any given opinion on a topic, to telling customers that their choice of entertainment they were purchasing wasn't what they were after, even if they specifically came into the store for that specific item. He was also lazy as fuck. Not a bad guy, but holy hell do I not miss working with him. I work with this guy that tries to convert people to his religion every day. It's super annoying. I worked with a really nice guy at my old job. Added him on FB. Multiple Bible study videos every day. He didn't say anything about religion at work. That's how you do it. I had a cubicle mate that would sing along to Christian praise songs in a faint whisper while he listened through headphones. It sounded like Parseltongue. JJJJEESSSSSUUUSSSSSSSS. There's no pro in proselytizing. Had a supervisor who multiple times would ask people if they'd accepted Jesus, as a gauge of whether they were moral people or not. Once threatened a coworker on a conference call, and then said he had not said what everyone heard him say, because I have Jesus in my heart. Called a coworker the R-word, then refused to stop using the word when asked, said everyone who was bothered could get over it. Eventually, shockingly, he was very suddenly fired, having made a lot of enemies and having multiple hour complaints.